Okay, awesome. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this ELN webinar today on best practices in applying MTSS to improve systems, staff, and student outcomes. My name is Joyce Debrah, and I am really excited to be here today. It is taking everything in me to kind of anchor myself to the seat. If you know me, you know I get super excited about all things education, but especially MTSS. Arlen kind of started us off already with you introducing yourself in the chat. I'm not going to be able to see the chat all that well, given that I'm presenting right now. I'm hoping that I can even move the chat over to another window in a moment, and I'm going to go back over there and peek and see some of the things that you guys are sharing in the chat. So a little bit about Joyce. I always think it's important to know who you are listening to. I wanted to share a little bit about me. I am a mother of two daughters, Jalia and Janice, and I happened to look through some old pictures a couple of days ago, and oh my God, was I blown away when I saw their pictures 20 years ago next to pictures that we took last month. I was like, why do they keep growing? I fed them and they just kept right on growing. I'm also a self-proclaimed foodie, as you can see with that big fat donut in my mouth. And because I like to eat just a little bit more than the average bear, I work out on a regular basis. That's a really important part of who I am and my identity. And I also love to travel. So last year I got to go to the Coliseum, and it was an amazing trip. So just thought I'd share a little bit about who I am beyond a professional. Professionally, I am a career educator. I've been in education my entire career since 1996. My first job was actually at my alma mater. So I graduated from high school at Bloom Technical High School and then went right back as a teacher 4 years later. And it was pretty awesome to have people take care of me my first couple of years teaching. I count it as a blessing. I served in schools around the city of Chicago for many years, almost 12 years, a little over 12 years, actually. I've been in a nonprofit space, still education adjacent with many nonprofits in the city of Chicago. I have a lot of experience as a coach, but specifically as a coach around MTSS and social and emotional learning. Those are social and emotional learning. Those are my two content areas that I really enjoy training around. I've also been an assistant principal, and I'm going to say, even though it says 3 years there, having done that during COVID years, I'm going to take some leap years around how many years I was an assistant principal, and then also professionally on national certified critical friends group coach, as well as a nationally certified real colors facilitator. So that's just a little bit about me. Let me go ahead and jump into today's objective. We are going to review a high-level understanding of the multi-tiered systems of support framework. We are also going to conceptualize MTSS from a school improvement lens today. And then lastly, we're going to identify some best practices in a successful implementation of MTSS. I really want to focus our time today around systems, staff, and students. So if you don't get anything else in the next 48 or so minutes, please be thinking systems, staff, and students, what those three things are going to be beneficial for you to understand within your implementation of MTSS. Go ahead and take a screen grab real quick of the bit.ly QR code, because you're going to be able to pull up this KWL that I've prepared for you. I'm a big fan of having some sort of anchor document or note catcher. And so I've prepared this for you. It will force you to make a copy. Feel free to make edits to it and use it as freely as you like. But I would really love for you to start capturing real quickly what you know about MTSS, what you understand, a word that comes to mind, right? And then I also want you to capture really quickly a couple of questions, which you can use the chat to put some of those in there. Arlen is going to assist me with looking at the chat, so I'll be able to see some of the things that you're saying. As we go through today's presentation, I hope that your L fills up with a whole lot of new learnings, a whole lot of new understandings, a whole lot of new conceptualizations around MTSS. I also added to the KWL two questions that I really want you to be anchored in as we go through today's presentation. So one question is, what do you need? You be selfish. I'm giving you permission to be selfish. What do you need to be successful in your implementation of MTSS with fidelity? That's question number one. The second question I want you to anchor yourself in today is, how will implementing MTSS impact your practice? So you, again, as the adult, how will this impact your practice? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit and give you time to kind of put some things in the chat. And I see the chat has kind of popped up a little bit. There's a 22 there, Arlen. Does that mean people are in the chat asking me questions that I can't see right now?
No, just still people introducing themselves, and no questions yet.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I hope everyone has the QR code. I'm going to go ahead and move forward. Okay, so I think always with any lesson, and I'm going to treat this as my classroom, with any lesson, it's important to level set. And I think this is one of the most important visualizations you can have within an MTSS discussion. And so a lot of times people say, oh, MTSS is the road to special ed. It's just a way to get people into, our students into special ed services. Let me disabuse you of that right now today, because that is not the purpose of multi-tier systems of support. It does encapsulate both academic RTI as well as PBIS, and some would even add in SEL to be more comprehensive in that interpretation. What I want us to focus on is the space that's in the middle there, where we really concentrate on some very common things between both PBIS and RTI. One being that we have scientifically based interventions, and we want instruction to be preventative. I would even add another P to that and say we want instruction to be proactive. We also want to make sure that when we talk about a continuum of supports, that we are thinking about increasing intensity based on need. So people don't get stuff that they don't need within the MTSS framework. Everybody has access to high quality tier 1 instruction, but if they need more, they get more based on what they need. Also important within the MTSS framework is regular screening. So again, we can be proactive early. Intervention happens early, not late, well after the train has left the caboose, if you would. The train has left the station, if you will. You want to be as proactive as you can be about that. Another important feature of MTSS framework is the problem-solving model and data-based decision rules. We'll talk a lot about that in the coming moments as well. Another important feature of focus on teaming. A lot of times we have one person in an entire district or one person in an entire building, and MTSS is all on that one person. MTSS does not function at its highest level when only one person is working on MTSS. It's really important to think about the team setting when you're working towards high fidelity implementation of multi-tier systems of support. We also want to emphasize improving quality education and quality implementation. So again, we talk about making sure that interventions are in place, but just as important as interventions is implementation. So one I and another I, implementation and intervention. And then you want to be able to make sure that it's embedded within the school improvement plan. Okay, so again, interventions are important, but bigger than that, much more substantial than that, is how we are improving education for our students. Okay, so as I talk through this next slide, I really do want you to use the chat and think about the difference between the house, the triangle, and the umbrella. So 1, 2, and 3. In the chat, real quick, pop in if you have seen 1, the house, 2, the triangle, and 3, the umbrella. Just go in and pop which ones you've seen, 1, 2, or 3, 1, 2, and 3, or any combination thereof. Okay, I want to see what people are saying. Okay, 1 and 2. 2, yep. 2 is very popular, right? 2 and 3, okay. Okay, lots of 2s. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about each of them really quickly. Oops, I'm sorry. Let's talk a little bit about that. So when we talk about the house, which is number 1, This one comes out of the Massachusetts Department of Education. As you can see, it's got a lot going on, right? There's a schoolhouse, there's tiers 1, 2, and 3 there. We've got universal design for learning, you've got equitable access, but then you've got these competency drivers that are really critical for how they think about MTSS is implemented with fidelity within their state, okay? So one of the important ones is the leadership driver. When we talk about leadership drivers within an MTSS framework, we are talking about vision. We're talking about management. We're talking about how things are coordinated so that they are best received within the system. We're also talking about actions that facilitate implementation, right? We want to make sure that things are put in place so that other things can happen in their decent and appropriate order. When we talk about competency drivers, we're talking about staffing, we're talking about professional learning, we're talking about coaching and building up capacity of people within the system to execute the expectations of the system well. And then when we're talking about implementation drivers, that's really like, how do we know what we're doing? Are we all clear on what we're doing? Are we sure that what we say we are doing is having the intended outcome? Okay. So it's very easy sometimes for us to do. As educators, we get fatigued quite frequently. But the implementation driver is about understanding what it is we say we're going to do and then being able to measure what that doing looks like, being able to say, oh, yeah, we're on the right track, we're going in the right direction. The second one is the triangle that everybody pretty much knows about. Everyone knows all about this triangle. And a triangle simply says that there are 3 tiers of intervention or 3 tiers of support. The first tier is your universal support. Everybody gets that. 100% of your building gets the high quality impact of education, the high quality school culture and climate, the high quality family and engagement. As you can see, it's a little agnostic. So it's not reading, it's not math, it's not SEL. It's just tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 2 speaks to how people that need more support get more support. So they get more support within a specialized group, in a small group maybe, for behavior, for academics, for SEL. Any number of things could happen at tier 2. Tier 3 would also be even more specialized. So students can have tiers 1, everybody's going to get that, but they could have tier 2 and they could have tier 3, or they could have only tier 1 and tier 3, or only tier 2 and tier 1, but everybody's always going to have tier 1. So tier 2 and tier 3 are places where students are going to go, and that is a very dynamic process within an MTSS framework. Kids can go to tier 2, but they don't live there forever. No student ideally should live in tier 2 for the entire year, unless, of course, that is the demand of the support they need. But ideally, that is a very dynamic process, and students are able to move from one tier to another. The California initiative around MTSS includes some other additional points, which I think are embedded in the other 2, but not called out explicitly. And that is the family and community engagement. We want to make sure that we understand that the student is the center of the conversation as it relates to multi-tier systems of support. All means all, which means their SEL, their behavior, their academic supports. But then also, what are we doing to bring in family? What are we doing to engage the community? How are they supporting us and making sure that that whole student gets everything that they need to be successful? The other important part that's called out in the California piece is the inclusive policy and practices. What are the policies and practices that we want to have in place for students to be successful in our learning environments? That could be, again, any number of things. Are we going to put a policy in place around how we make sure students move from one tier to another? Are we going to put a policy in place around attendance and behavior? What are the policies that we're going to put in place? What are the equitable policies that we're going to put in place to make sure that all students get the support that they need? Okay. So in the chat, again, I want to give you an opportunity to really think about all that each of these 3 visuals around MTSS give you, but then see where it allows you to be thoughtful about I hadn't added that to my repertoire, my understanding of MTSS prior to this conversation. What are your thoughts about these models? And you can make it quick. Is it new to you? Was it interesting? Is there something you hadn't thought of before? What are some things you could share about what you just heard as it relates to the models around MTSS? Okay, and I think I've lost the chat again. Arlen, let's see. Show chat. All right, here we go. You guys are good in the chat. Thank you. Anybody want to add to the chat around what your thoughts are of those three models? Yep, Maria, thank you. Adding families. Awesome. Trista, thank you. Yes, Cassandra will be available. I do too, Leanne. The Massachusetts model was quite riveting for me. The way that they really put everything together was really informative and spoke to how I show up as an educator as well. Okay. I agree, Angela. Those different models do make a difference. I am to UDL is pretty awesome. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Feel free to continue using the chat. I will come back to the chat on a regular basis and just kind of raise up some of what you guys are sharing with me today. I really wish that you guys could come off mute, but Arlen wouldn't let us do that. I'm teasing. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on where we are right now. So I wanted to be able to share a couple of other pieces around, again, conceptualizing MTSS for your own, again, growth and development, and just really pulling this out of an intervention conversation and really concretizing it as a systems-wide conversation. So when we talk about successful implementation of MTSS, we're really talking about stakeholders and what they understand. Too often we're in our school buildings or in our district offices, and we hope that people understand what we mean when we say MTSS, but probably in a couple of situations, people really don't understand. In addition to staff, we want to make sure the families understand what we say or what we mean when we say MTSS. If people are not on the same accord as to what it means to have an MTSS framework in your building, that's a great opportunity to re-educate people. The other thing that really makes me very happy about MTSS is that it establishes a level of uniformity. How do we do the same thing and make sure all students have access to a high quality education? How do we replicate some of the practices that allow us to do this well over and over again? Now, that's not to say that everybody gets the same thing, but they do get the same opportunities towards having a greater, more equitable educational experience. It also, to me, speaks to the ability or the need for us to build capacity of our staff. A lot of people focus only on what kids need within the MTSS framework, but I would challenge you to think about, what do adults need? How many adults are struggling to make sure that they are attending to the social and emotional needs of students or attending to the behavior needs of students? A lot of us, especially if you were a former high school person, you get your content area training when you're getting ready to go into a classroom, but there's very little explicit training around, how do I deal with students that are dysregulated? How do I make sure that they get support around mental health services? Those are things that you have to build the capacity of your staff to be able to help and mitigate with success in your building. The other thing I would call your attention to is scheduling. Again, not just for the students, but for the adults. Are you saving and preserving time for adults to be able to look at data on a regular basis, look at student work on a regular basis, have access to professional learning on a regular basis? All these things are critical to the establishment of implementing a strong MTSS structure within your building or your ecosystem. Another big deal, data, and more data. Now, this can be overwhelming for some and exciting for others. For me, it's very exciting. The difference is we have to make sure that that data is useful. Like, we don't need to know how many sheets of toilet paper are in the boys' bathroom. That's not really helpful, right? But what we do need to make sure is that we have access to data that is meaningful. How many of our third graders are reading on or near grade level? How many of our eighth graders are, getting C's or better in class? How many of our first graders are not making it to school on time? These are questions and data points that you need if you're going to put practices in place to make sure that all of those things are mitigated properly. You want to make sure that you have visibility with that data and that data is transparent. That data also needs to be accessible and useful across multiple stakeholder groups, right? That data needs to be utilized in a proactive manner and a solution-oriented manner. So we don't want to beat people up with data. We want to empower people with data. And if you're using that data correctly, and with fidelity, what that data will allow you to do is identify gaps in equitable access to high quality, rigorous instruction, and go ahead and make sure that you put things in place so the students that need more get more. We are constantly trying to make sure that our students are getting everything they need, and we recognize that everyone doesn't need the same thing. But the only way you would know that and where the support needs to go is if you are looking at your data on a regular basis, okay? So if you leave with nothing else today, I think I've made this pretty clear. MTSS is not just about interventions. It's much bigger than that. It's much broader than that. It's actually much more noble than that. The interventions are the outcome of what you do within a healthy system of multi-tier systems of support, okay? So some other high concepts that I want you to get before you leave today. So MTSS is an organizational framework. I like to say MTSS is chess, not checkers. So it's really a strategy game, not simply capture one thing and another, one thing and another, that's it. Chess is a much more thoughtful, strategic, high-level cognitive load than simply checkers. So, and when we talk about an organizational framework, we're talking about making sure that when we make selections around our curriculum, make selections around instruction, make selections around assessment, that those three things will meet the needs of the students that are in front of us right then and there. We want to make sure that our professional development builds the skill and capacity of the adults to work through each of those three areas well, again, curriculum, instruction, and assessment. It's a spatial framework. That means that there's a structure built in for coaching, built in at the district level, built in at the school level, even built in at the teacher in the classroom level. There's a misconception that tier 2 and tier 3 always have to take place outside of the classroom. That is not true. Tier 2 supports can happen within the classroom, and teachers can be skill built up to being able to provide tier 2 instruction within their core classroom. And then we also want to make sure that we're looking at where students need support. When we look at that whole child interpretation of MTSS, a kid like me was great in math. When I needed tier two and tier 3 supports, it was primarily in reading. That was my struggle. Once I got those supports and was able to run on my own, then I didn't need that support anymore. Very similar, okay? And then when we talk about an operational framework, again, it's really about implementation, implementation, implementation. Are we implementing with fidelity so that our practices, policies, and procedures meet the needs of everybody within the stakeholder group and that people can do what they are expected to do? Okay, so I'll move on from there. Hopefully that helps a lot. So I want to focus a little bit more on tier 1 because really, if you get your tier 1 in order, tier 2 and tier 3 will be that much more effective. But what we find a lot of time is that we look at our triangle, that red, green, and yellow piece, and it looks wonky. It looks out of whack. We're wondering, well, my triangle is upside down. I have 80% of students who are not meeting expectations. And I would say to you, turn the triangle right side up and really think about if 80% of students are in a particular place, that means you have to adjust curriculum, instruction, and assessment to meet them where they are. Now, does that mean that you teach below grade level? No, we know that we have to meet students where they are and where they should be trying to attain to. So we've heard phrases, especially since COVID, like just-in-time supports, right, at tier 1. Your practices, your policies, and procedures allow you to meet 80% of students where they are so that you can begin to strategically think about where 2 and tier 3 supports are needed. If 80% of students are not being met effectively at tier 1, then the question becomes, why not? What do we need to be doing differently? What are the questions we need to be asking? What is actually the problem? Is it curriculum? Is it instruction? Is it assessment? Are we using the right tool to assess where our students are? Are we embedding the correct instructional practices that will meet that set of students where they are? Are we even using the curriculum that would, again, meet the students where they are in their path to become more independent learners or become more effective learners? And then you want to think about, are there clear strategic improvements that you can make on a systems level? If there are things that make the whole system move a little bit more effectively, then those are the things that you want to put into place, the practices that you want to put into place, as well as the expectations you want to establish with the adults in your ecosystem, okay? So I thought it would be helpful to share a couple of data points with you, national data points, just so we could think about, again, equity and access. And also, so maybe you would go back and be inspired to look at some of the gaps within your data in your building or your district. So I pulled up some data from the NAEP database online, and you can see reading achievement for African American students versus reading achievement for non-African American students. And over time, since 1992, we can see that this gap has remained fairly consistent. And I would ask folks on the call to think about, where are the opportunities for us to do things slightly different so that we're closing this gap. This gap exists for reading, math, discipline. It exists for our special ed students, our diverse learners. There's so many different places where if you look at the data, you can figure out an opportunity to insert greater access, greater equity for our students. This is book one. This is the reading one. I want to show you the math one. The gap is very similar. There's been some closure in the gap, but again, we have students who are disaffected in terms of their math growth or their reading growth. And even when we go to equity around exclusionary discipline practices, it gets even a little bit worse. So I thought this was mind-boggling here. I pulled this up maybe in October, I believe, so it's not exactly 100% accurate today, but it does represent data from 2017 to 2018 that talks about the exclusionary discipline and equity numbers for the country. And each state is broken down. And I thought, wow, look at this data. If I'm the state of Mississippi or the state of Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Illinois, look at the disparities around exclusionary discipline. And we all know that if students are not in school for discipline issues or otherwise, it's very difficult to bring them up to speed in their academic performance. It's very difficult to reinforce positive behavior expectations. It's very difficult to tend to their mental health or social and emotional needs. So when we talk about looking at the data will tell us where we need to put the work. When I look at this, I can see very clearly where we need to be putting in work around getting to more equitable outcomes for our students. So I want to pause you there, because I've talked a lot. I'm not used to doing all of this talking. So I'm going to pause and have you actually come into the chat and share with me some of the things you were thinking, some of the questions you have in mind. And it is okay that we don't answer the questions right now, but I do want to give our participants an opportunity to share some of the thinking based on what I've articulated about MTSS thus far. So I'll pause for just a moment just so you can share some of your thoughts. Arlen, can you help me monitor the chat? I'm struggling to find it, please.
Yeah, we've got one comment here from Maria that says providing students with culturally relevant materials.
Absolutely, Maria. That speaks to the curriculum, right? When we talk about CIA, not the CIA, but curriculum instruction and assessment, how are we making sure that if our students are in front of us from a different culture, a different background, that the material we give them resonates with them, has them more engaged in the learning process. Thank you for that. Very important. Excellent question, Sharice. What checks and balances can ensure quality Tier 1 instruction is implemented? Excellent question. I think we got an answer for that as we go along. So thank you for that. I did not pay her, everyone. She just came up with that on her own. Okay, how do you build time into the school day to allow for teachers to collaborate and view MTSS data? Excellent question, Leanne. I appreciate that. That's a question we're going to talk about a little bit later. Helping teachers to correctly interpret the root cause of students' behavior rather than biased interpretations. Absolutely important, Sarah Beth. Thank you. Karen, I think you said finding the time and the right resources to educate and train our educational staff on how to implement Tier 2 SEL techniques is very challenging. Karen, you hit on something that's very important and that I've experienced before as a SEL specialist. I was working with 42 schools at the time around implementing SEL, and I could not agree with you more. And I think part of it is that we don't have a school climate that is established at Tier 1 to help students and staff access the right techniques, then it makes implementing Tier 2 and Tier 3 that much more challenging. Very, very much so agree. Okay, thank you for that, everyone. So let me see if I can move the chat out the way here again. Let's see if I get it. Oh, there's one more educate. Oh, there are more things. I'll come back to your comments in a moment, everyone. So, but feel free to keep putting them in there. We'll come back to them. So what are the best practices, Joyce? Glad you asked. Here's number one. Best practice number one. So it is really, really of the most critical importance that the leadership of your district or school are involved heavily in the implementation of MTSS. Well, Joyce, there's so many things to do. Listen, I'm the principal. I have so many other things to do. I can't do MTSS and do all the other stuff I'm supposed to do. Don't you know I'm already taxed enough? As a matter of fact, I do, but hear me out. I truly believe that if you implement MTSS from a leadership position at the helm of the ship, you will see a significant difference in all of the other cascading impacts around movement in your building. Our leaders have to be strong, knowledgeable, and very clear about what your goals are in your building for you to implement MTSS with fidelity. You set the tone in your building when people say no one is doing it, it's because no one is monitoring it. We know that whatever gets monitored gets done. So setting the tone for how and why MTSS is so critical. And we just talked about, I just showed you very clearly, 3 important data points. There are students in classrooms every day that are being ignored. Their reading is not improving. Their math is not improving. Their discipline outcomes are not improving. Very clearly, when you set the tone for how you expect MTSS to mitigate any one of those 3 data points, people begin to understand why that's important. You are responsible for the buy-in in your building and the commitment of your teachers, your parents, your community partners to implement MTSS with integrity. And even though you don't want it to be a checklist item, there may be some times when you're saying, you know what, to make this easier for you, Miss Debrah, I'm going to give you a checklist. Once you do these 3 things, then we know we can move our students to the next level, right? And you just help people with training wheels, with compassion, not with a bully pulpit, but with compassion and with training and with ongoing professional learning so that they get to the point where it becomes a natural part of their practice, okay? And then you also want to make sure that you provide resources and guidance. So you have to set the expectation. You have to provide the buy-in. You have to provide the support and the structure so that the implementation aligns with the goals that you set forth for student outcomes. If what's happening in your building does not ultimately help the students increase in their reading math attainment, then it's what are we doing? We are making sure that we are getting the strongest students that we can so that they can compete in the global world, okay? Some questions about MTSS and leadership that I want you to think about. Is my principal or is my district leadership involved in implementing MTSS? What is the scope of it? What are the data points? I'm giving you a couple of good questions. What are the data points that are associated with our MTSS implementation, right? Are we thinking from a school improvement lens? In the state of Illinois, many of us have school improvement plans. If one of our data points is to increase the NWEA scores of third graders from the 25% to 45%, then our MTSS plan around reading needs to align with that. I hope that makes sense. Our plan around MTSS implementation needs to align with that school improvement goal, that data point that you've outlined for ISB that says these are the things that we want to change in our school community. They need to go together. Has my principal established a time, a place, and even a team to address MTSS on a regular basis? Again, system-wide, not just are we implementing interventions, but are we thinking about the professional learning? Are we thinking about whether or not this curriculum meets the needs of our students? Are we thinking about the instructional practices that speak well to the students and the staff in our building? Are we making sure that all these things make sense? There's a word I'm going to tell you later. I'm going to give you a sneak peek. The word is coherence. Does it all make sense? All right. Think about that when you think about MTSS and leadership. Best practice number 2. Focus on infrastructure and fidelity. Infrastructure and fidelity. Make sure that your staff and student schedules have enough time for people to meet the expectation that you have established. You may not be able to do anything about your schedule today, but as you think about next year, and if there's a way to figure out how to adjust schedules, then maybe that's a thing that we do. It may be as simple as taking 5 minutes off of lunch, which kids waste a lot of time at lunch. 5 minutes off of lunch, so at the end of the week, teachers have 20 extra minutes to look at data if that's what you want to build in. Every building is different. Please do not take my word. Don't go back and tell people that Joyce said, go make up some time off of lunch to do MTSS. Look at your schedules and think about what makes sense for your school community. Also, make sure as a best practice that you have data that is manageable and actionable. Please make sure that people that need access to data have access to data. Make sure that you establish and modify teams and job descriptions so people are very clear about their role within your MTSS structures in your building. You want to make sure that if you have a data manager, someone that really just streamlines how other people get data, because one of the things you don't want people to do is be really confused about data. We don't want to overwhelm people with data. People don't need access to 13 different places to get data. That's not what you need them to be able to do. But you want people to be able to see a comprehensive amount of data that makes sense in a succinct sort of way. You want to be able to allocate resources intelligently and per what the data says. And then you want to think about the F word, fidelity. It's not a bad word. The F word is fidelity. Are we doing what we said we would do? How do we know it's effective? And what are you monitoring to prove that it's effective? If it takes for you to check in on things a little bit more frequently, that will give you the information you need to make decisions around proactive, solution-oriented changes that change the outcomes for students, okay? Best practice number 3. MTSS is data-rich, data-driven, and data-informed. So again, when we think about a leadership competency or even an infrastructure competency, you want to make sure that you're improving data competency and culture. You should not be in your building in a place where people are uncomfortable with data. We have so much data, we need to be comfortable with it, whether that's attendance data, whether that's a data around reading instruction, data around how students are acquiring information. All of that data needs to be looked at on a regular basis so that you can make the changes within your system that are necessary. You want to engage in the problem-solving process often because it is critically important to understand the root cause. And I think someone in the chat might have said that a little bit earlier. Frequently, we are looking at a problem we're solving for X when the problem really is Y. So you really want to be thoughtful. Here's a very simple example of one that used to get me all the time. as an assistant principal, I would look at grades for my on track for my students, and I'd be like, wow, why is my 6th grade on track so awful? This doesn't seem right. I was in their classroom last week. I could see that they were doing things that looked great in there. And then I would go back and see that the teacher didn't put in grades. So is it that the students are not performing, or that there's a system breakdown that the data looks bad when it's actually not? So just making sure that we understand the root cause of things. Now, I gave us a very simple example, but there are probably a dozen other examples of times when you looked at the data and it's pointed you in one direction, and then you fix something in the system and then you can move on without incident. But then it might point to something that really does need care and attention. So that's why the root cause analysis is critical. You want to make sure that there's progress monitoring to evaluate effectiveness. If you don't know how well things are progressing, you don't know where things need to change. So progress monitoring is an absolute must. It has to happen. A very simple analogy around progress monitoring. McDonald's, the biggest, hugest food conglomerate in the world. It is not by accident that regardless of where you go in this country, that you get the same great French fries every time you go there. I told you all I'm a foodie, so there you go. Okay. I know without fail, if I go to McDonald's in Michigan or if I go to McDonald's in California, I'm going to get great French fries with just the perfect amount of salt. And I like that every time. So your progress, someone is monitoring that. Someone is making sure that that level of quality exists. So think about progress monitoring as quality assurance. Think about it that way. You want to be reflective and proactive. I put spring break in the parentheses because we know right up until spring break, what happens to kids? They lose their minds, they get squirrely. But guess what? We know that every single year. That's not a surprise. We should not be surprised by that. So how are we reflective and thoughtful about what we know has happened and what we know will happen? And we get in front of that in a proactive manner. And then you want to be able to engage in continuous improvement, which all these things work together to make sure that you're thinking about, how do I make this better? So MTSS is not a one and done sort of proposition. You're continuously doing it. It's part of how you develop and improve your systems, your structures, your policies, your practices, your procedures. It's okay for things to change if it's for the better of the whole community, okay? And my next slide, what I've provided for you, and Arlen, is in the chat or in the deck. If you could drop this in the chat for me, I would greatly appreciate it. But what I wanted to share with you is one of a dozen different protocols around data analysis. This one is the Atlas protocol. It's adapted from the National School Reform Faculty, and it is a very simple data protocol. You can have teachers do this data protocol with their classroom data. It would be really interesting, for example, if all of your 3rd grade classrooms did the Atlas protocol. Let's see how our 3rd graders are doing. We know that they have just finished IAR in the state of Illinois. So once that data comes back, let's look at a classroom analysis of each of the data points and see what areas we have an opportunity to make improvements around instruction at 3rd grade. Depending on what that data says, it might inform how you think about curriculum for 3rd grade next year. So you want to be looking at your assessment so you can really think about what this data is communicating to you. So again, that data has to be accessible. Who gets it? When do they get it? Where do they get it? In grade level meeting, after school, your ILT, there are all sorts of different places and contexts in which you would be looking at that data. What types of data will you be looking at? As you can see there, you can be looking at state, district, local data, school level data. I would even add, again, classroom level data. Are you looking at academic, discipline, attendance, school climate data? We do the 5Es. I think we just closed the window on the state of Illinois around the 5Es data. Pull that data out when it comes and look at it. It's telling us very valuable information, where we need to be looking and what we need to be thinking about for improvement. You want to look at fidelity and implementation data. So what is the outcome of what we're doing, but are we doing it well? If, for example, you are doing an after-school program for your tier 2 and tier 3 students, additional on top of the regular days intervention. And one of the data points is that only 50% of the students are coming, then that's a data point that's important, because that will tell you that students can't get any better if they're not coming to the program. So you want to look at implementation data as well as fidelity data. You want to look at the purpose of that data. What are you trying to improve? I would hope, again, thinking about tier 1, you're improving core instruction, the universal access to your learning. My building has a whole lot of Amazon delivery, so please forgive the interruption. But improving core instruction should be your primary focus. You'll go to tier 2 and tier 3 once you feel confident about the strength and veracity of what's happening at tier 1. Again, fidelity and implementation for staff. Are all staff meeting the expectation that you have set around using, for example, Kagan to implement high quality collaborative structures in your classrooms? When you do your observations principles, do you see that 80% of teachers are using collaborative structures? Awesome, that's great, right? Woohoo! Do all of your staff need additional training in Kagan structures? Probably not if you got 80% fidelity. But what if you do that same observation one week and only 30% of teachers are using the collaborative structures in your building? Then you've got a problem. Only 30% of teachers are using the second step curriculum that you've invested a good amount of money in, right? There are different data points that will allow you from a staff perspective to know if what you have in place is working and why it is or is not working. You want to think about disproportionality. So as leaders, are we looking at our data and seeing where there are gaps for our ELL students, for our diverse learners, for our African-American males, for our females that are not performing as well in different subject areas? When we think about STEM, are our girls still struggling in math and science, or are we making sure that we put supports in place for that? Are our boys still struggling with reading, or are we putting supports in place in that? Look and disaggregate that data to see where the gaps are, so you can begin to fill those gaps in with the structures and policies and procedures and practices. Notice there's some things in what I'm repeating so that you can do a better job. Leverage your RSPs, your related service providers, your classroom supports, so that they gain greater fidelity and greater content knowledge and capacity in supporting the classroom teacher and executing some of these expectations. Your related service providers are a great asset to your community and will even strengthen your tier 1 instruction. You can leverage some of them for professional development as well. And then last but not least, how are you utilizing your data? Are you using it for assessment purposes, universal screening, or diagnostic purposes? I believe the chat just lit up for me. Arlen, can you help me see if there's something in there that I need to be looking at?
No,
Good.
we're okay.
We're okay. Thank
Yeah.
you. Okay. Yes. Panorama is great. Renaissance Star. And let me just say, all of this is content agnostic, right? So whether you have a spreadsheet, somebody in your building loves a spreadsheet, or you have Panorama or iReady or any number of the different access points to data, all of them can be useful depending on how you use them. Okay, so I want to make sure that I say that as well. In my school, my last school, we used iReady quite a bit, and it was really fantastic. And I know Panorama and a couple of other providers also have great platforms that allow you to be successful. So let's move on to best practice number 4, a commitment to capacity building and professional learning. I think I've pretty much been saying that all along. So you want to focus on educating people on MTSS, making sure that they understand how to use MTSS, and then you want to empower staff to meet the expectations that you've set around MTSS. Whole child, UDL, implementation drivers, all of the things that we've talked about this entire time, so that they get stronger and they understand why they're leveraging. We don't want people to feel like this is yet another alphabet soup of educational implementation that somebody's going to forget in another 3 to 5 years. We get it. We've been there, done that. This is really about how we do school, okay? You want to provide targeted coaching and support. And I would even say tier your staff. I talked about that a little bit ago. If you've got 30 staff members, you don't have time to coach everybody. As a matter of fact, all of them don't even need coaching. You want to think about how you tier your staff so the people that need coaching get coaching. People that need support get support. If you got a teacher that's knocking it out the park, let them continue to knock it out the park. Go provide that support and be thoughtful about where you put those resources so the right people get the right support, just like what you would do with the students. You want to foster a culture of continuous improvement if you want this to be sustainable. It should not, again, feel like a hit it and quit it sort of thing. I do it once and we never come back to it again. This is an ongoing system of support, an ongoing system of improvement, okay? So you want to be thinking, even though we made our improvements here, even when you get to from a level 3 school to a level 2 school, you still have access to get to a level 1 school. Even if you get growth, then how do we get to attainment? These are the questions you want to be constantly thinking about continually. How do we improve, improve, improve? And then you want to avoid initiative fatigue or abandonment. Again, looking at your data should help significantly in that because your data will always point you in the right direction, okay? Best practice number 5. This is for everyone within the MTSS framework. So the communication has to be very clear. Do we communicate early and often about what we want to happen in our building? Again, think about the frame of the curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Is everyone using the same curriculum that the principal or school board approved? Are they all using it, or are people off down bunny trails and doing something else? If they're not all using the curriculum, how do you measure implementation? How do you get to uniformity? How do you get to scale, right? These are some of the words that we talked about a little bit earlier. So you want to be clear in what you communicate the expectations are. So be sure to rely on that. If people don't know what you want, they will not give you what you've asked for. You want to be sure to collaborate within the MTSS framework. I like to say MTSS is a team sport. There is no I in terms of a person, a one singular person executing everything that needs to happen within the MTSS framework. All stakeholders need to be knowledgeable, capable, and willing to help implement MTSS with fidelity. Consistency is another huge aspect of the C's of MTSS. Is everyone doing the same thing in the same way? Go back to the French fry analogy, right? You can make adaptations where necessary, but we need to know that our baseline has a level of quality and consistency that everyone can live into. And then last, but certainly not least, is this coherence. How are we all working together? There's so many different tentacles, right? There's so many different elements that can be working, but do they make sense? Is it a coherent thought process? Are people really understanding what's being asked of them? And then once we're sure they understand, they can raise their hand and say, I understand what you're asking me to do. Now I need help with the how do I do it? That's a whole different conversation, okay? So that is the 5 best practices around MTSS implementation. We are coming to almost, I think I got about 4 minutes left. Arlen can help me with timing, but I do want to make sure I open up the floor for questions and feedback. And then you can also still please go back to your KWL. Hopefully you can add some things to it, what you learned today, something you enjoy, an idea you plan to put into practice. And then hopefully you really are walking away with this idea of the systems that I can improve in my building when I think about MTSS implementation, the staff I can focus on and supporting their growth and professional learning around MTSS, and then the students and how they will benefit from a better implementation of MTSS if based on what today's content was. Are any questions coming into the chat, Arlen, or feedback?
Let's look through here. Trying to see one here. A lot of people just talking about the different applications that they're using.
Okay,
Branching minds came up.
okay.
But no, Joyce, I don't see any direct questions for you at this time. But if people have
Okay.
them, feel free to type them into the chat.
Yes, please do. So when my last couple of minutes here, what I will do is tell you guys, do not start from scratch. So you've mentioned a lot of different, what I will say is programs like Panorama, Branching Minds, I think I saw Freckle. All of those things are tools within your MTSS toolkit. But when we're talking about, again, a very clear and comprehensive understanding of the framework, Think about it like this. If I'm a doctor and I know how to use a scalpel, but I don't know where to put the scalpel or understand what I'm fixing when I pick up the scalpel, the tool is kind of meaningless, right? So that's not to say that you should not have tools. I want to impart to you that understanding the totality of the system in the framework is far more beneficial to you than any tool will ever be. So I've provided here on the screen some different resources that are very, very helpful in all of the aspects of MTSS implementation, PBIS, academic, as well as SEL, and some different states and organizations that have done a great job with pulling different things together. So you don't have to start from scratch. You really do not. There's a bevy of information out there that you can use, okay? Then I will also share with you for SELCon 2024, there's going to be a SEL and School Communities Workshop April 19th. This is being facilitated by SEL for Illinois. Again, this is a great opportunity to see some of the more specific SEL related structures around MTSS. If you have time in your schedule, feel free to click that QR code and register. I believe I see a cost on there of $2.99 per person, but it's going to be absolutely great. And I think you all will find great value in that. So I am now going to share one last screen. If you want to reach out to me, I am happy to share more information. I love talking about MTSS. I love talking about school improvement. I love coaching adults around implementing, and it's just one of my passions, and I really enjoy it. So if you think you want to reach out to me and find additional information and support, I am happy to do that. And I believe I'm right on time, Arlen.
You are, Joyce. Thank you so much for sharing those best practices with us around MTSS. Thank you to all of our participants, too, for the great chat that was going on. If you've got just a couple minutes, Joyce, Nor has asked or said that he is most muddy about Tier 2 and Tier 3. Do you mind clarifying the difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 in just the
Okay,
couple
no
minutes we have left?
problem. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. I missed that in the chat. So tier 2 is really about a student, or even again staff, we're talking about a system, providing additional support on top of what is already established as your high quality tier 1 instruction or your high quality tier 1 resource. That you want to add a little bit more, someone you expect to perform at a particular level and they're just not getting it. They need a little bit more. So tier 2 would be when the teacher would pull maybe a small group, or an interventionist who is in your building around SEL support might do a lunch bunch for kids that have anger management issues, for example. They're in class and they're throwing books and they get angry when they can't get the content right. And the teacher within that context is unable to with the tier 1 support anger management. But guess if they had second step, they are already talking about it, but that kid needs a little bit more. So they would be pulled out by your counselor or some other related service provider to get tier 2 support. If what is happening in that small group is still not enough to support that student in regulating their behavior or their anger, they might get more intensive support at tier 3. And it might be one-on-one instead of in a small group. Hopefully that's clear.
Perfect, Joyce. Thank you so much for sharing that in the last couple minutes we have together. If there's any other questions, you can type them in the chat. I see a lot of thank yous in there, Joyce, for you, a lot of appreciation for your time spent with us this afternoon. Again, this was recorded, and I'll be sending out the recording link and the evaluation tomorrow, so our Illinois participants can get their ISB evidence of completion form and 1 PD clock hour for your attendance today. If you don't have any further questions, if you hover on your Zoom toolbar, in the lower right-hand corner is a big red leave button that will log you out of the session this afternoon. And we will see you at the next Ed Leaders Network live webinar. Thanks, Joyce.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.